Even the most obstinate atheist can understand how from the Christian worldview God supplies a rational source for a person's ability to reason and to think logically, where the grounding of all reality is himself logical and rational, and has created us after his image, our very brains created to come up with logical, truthful conclusions about the nature of reality, for God has proposed it to be so. However, in the atheist worldview there is absolutely no basis to believe or trust in logic or reason, where the grounding of all reality, the absolute by which they believe they have derived their existence from, is itself not rational. In this worldview, a person's thinking could be no more than the molecular cascading ticking off of biochemical dominoes, just a mere causal effect from the non-rational absolute they are operating from. Their thinking could be merely of uncontrolled biochemical process which forms a byproduct called thought, that they believe is leading them to ultimate truth. The following video shows the foolishness of atheism.
The bottom line is the reason why you don't believe, but the Bible gets right to the matter. The reason is not because there isn't enough evidence. You've ruled out evidence for God from the get-go. There's overwhelming evidence, okay? It's very simple. You know what the evidence is that God exists? The answer is because you're rational. And because rationality you possessing rationality can only exist if that which is ultimate is rational and it bestows it upon you. But if you say, au contraire, I don't accept that, I'm rational, but my rationality emerges from an ocean or a universe where the ground of all being, whatever it is, the reason why anything exists at all is non-rational, you have a major contradiction on your hand. You have an antithesis that rationality exudes from non-rationality. You're going to have to explain that. How is rationality exuded from what you believe to be causal sequencing? Because in your world, that's what you believe. Now, you can't even justify that there's causal sequencing, right? You believe it. But even if I grant that to you, how does causal sequencing, the dominoes at a subatomic and an atomic and molecular level, the clicking dominoes of molecular action, how does that exude rationality? Claiming that consciousness and hence rationality is an emergent property is just begging the question. It's just reasserting the same claim. So how do you get freedom of reason and thinking and rationality from non-rationality? See, it can't be answered.
Okay.
Then there's another problem. It's called the one and the many. What's the ultimate nature of reality? Is it the one or the many? Right? This is a philosophical problem. Now, this problem is easily answered from the Christian worldview. God has revealed that he has equal ultimacy in terms of his oneness and his manyness, and that is reflected in his creation, where the creation is one, but that there are universals and manyness and distinctions. If you don't accept that, then you're going to have to answer the one and many question. What's the ultimacy of reality? Is it its oneness or its manyness? And if it's the manyness, where do you get universals? Okay? Because you see, if you have an ocean of particulars, it doesn't mean there are universals. When I say universals, talking about things like laws or classes of things. If you say a dog, the term dog is a universal. It's a class. You say cat or tree or apple, a fly, a rock. Okay? What secures that two separate particulars are actually members of the same class? Right? So if you say, well, there's a dog and there's a dog, right? What you're saying is They're two separate particulars, but they both possess the same class. Well, do they? Okay. How do you know they're not doppelgangers? A doppelganger is what we refer to as a celebrity lookalike. Right? Right? You say, oh, but we cut them open. It doesn't matter what the appearance is. They could be biological doppelgangers. Right? So the point is, there's no way to rationally justify universals because you can't appeal to your experience because your experiences aren't universal. So you see, atheism is filled with landscape landmines that it can't avoid, that it gets exploded in. But you see, atheists don't care about that. They don't care about that it's incoherent because all that matters to them is, nope, there's no evidence for God. I asked an atheist once, why are you an atheist? Well, because there's no evidence for God, he says. I said, okay. So let me get this straight. You're asserting there's no evidence for God. That's right. Say, okay. How did you determine that nothing has its origin in God? He goes, what do you mean? I just told you there's no evidence for God. That's right. That's a claim. How did you determine that? He says, well, nobody's presented anything to me. Okay, so good. You're presented with the sun, the moon, and the stars, and bunny rabbits, and tigers, and trees. Well, that doesn't indicate God. Okay, good. How did you determine that? And then they're going to say, well, you're just shifting the burden of proof. No, I'm not. I'm asking you to defend the statement there is no evidence for God. And if you say there's no evidence for God, what you're saying is nothing that exists needs to reference God as the origin point. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that the apple on the counter can be an apple on the counter without God? How do you know that there's no causal relations between the apple and God? And I'm not talking about a miracle here. See, God by definition will be the ground of all being, the origin point for all facts. So if somebody says, well, that's not evidence for God, say, okay, what's it evidence of? What's the causal origin of the apple? I go, well, I don't know. Well, if you don't know, how did you rule God out? And then you know what they say? It never fails. They go, because there's no evidence for God. You see, it's a dog chasing its tail. You can only say there's no evidence for God is if you already know what the causal origin of everything is. If you don't know what the causal origin of everything is, you can't rule God out. Now, if somebody might say, well, you know what, I could show God is incoherent. Good. Show me how you have coherency at all without God. If you want to claim God is incoherent, that means that there's some coherency and rationality exists. Show me what is the basis and reality for rationality and reason. What is it? You know what they say? They go, oh, my brain. Okay. So you have events happening in your brain. How does that equate to rationality? Do you know Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga, brilliant man, has, I believe, very successfully argued, and even if you don't agree, it's successful. It's a very intimidating line of reasoning. He said, if evolution is true, we don't have a reason to trust our cognition, because evolution doesn't select for truth. It selects for actions that survive. That's all. So the bottom line is simply this. If you just say, well, I just don't believe, well, yeah, you don't believe in God, but you believe in something that replaces God. So why do you believe that? And somebody says, well, I don't believe either, then say, well, then you can't believe anything then. If you don't believe in a personal absolute, and if you don't believe in an impersonal absolute, then on what basis do you believe anything? Because an apple on the counter is not absolute. It's not non-dependent. It's not non-derivative. And neither is anything else that you know of. See, atheist reasoning, especially on the book level and on the YouTube level, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible.